Bismillah. Hi, Keyvan. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you?
We're doing good. It's hay fever season here, I've got the hay fever right now. I'm on a few medications. It's going away. It's no big
I
deal.
know it's getting kind of hasty here as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, we are going over a very crucial topics of ex-Bahais. Uh, Let me tell you by this. By inflicting difficulties, on hundreds of dissidents, right? The ex-Baha'is parties actually, in my opinion, proved and entrenched their unwavering, faith in Baha'ism.
Hmm.
You know, though no blood is apparently shed, the well-being of many people is still, being sacrificed. If Baha'ism is just a fictional story, then it is very cruel to prevent, some student from going to have fun on the beach. By nevertheless doing so, again, I think the ex-Baha'i parties tell the world, and tell themselves that they really believe in the Baha'i story.
Hmm.
Sacrifice they not only strengthens, your faith in Baha'ism, shall we say, but often substitute for all your other obligations towards it. Most of the great stories, concerning humankind have set up ideals, that most people cannot fulfill.
Hmm.
How many, Baha'is really follow the commandments and accords laid down by Baha'u'llah, never lying or coveting? How many Baha'is have so far reached, I'm asking, the stage of, one kind or egolessness? How many Baha'is work to the utmost of their abilities, I wonder, while taking, no more than they really need? I believe, unable to live up to this ideal, the ex-Baha'i turned to sacrifice as a solution. An ex-Baha'i may engage, in different kind of fraudulent activities,
Hmm.
visit the occasional, even prostitute or mistreat his elderly parents, but then convince himself that he's a pious person, because he supports the destruction of, shall we say, the Universal House of Justice construction. The thing is, uh, what do you think they enjoy harming people for no good reason whatsoever?
Let me first break this question down to a couple of different components, and I'll start here. Okay, I start with the hermetic maxim of as above, so below, but in a kind of a different application of this principle. With the Baha'i faith, right? I would say, as Baha'u'llah, so do all the other Baha'is. That the flock, or I hesitate to use this word, the ecclesia of the Baha'is, the greater church of Baha'is, for lack of a better term, are a complete reflection of their founder. We know, based on irrefutable historical evidence from multiple places, not just the Bayanis, that Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri Baha'u'llah was a corrupt individual, right? And the first person that never applied any of the principles of Baha'ism was Baha'u'llah himself. We look at his life and the incidents of his life. Baha'u'llah never applied, for example, the principle of not gossiping against any people. The entire annals of Baha'i writings are full of gossip. Beginning with his Loh Siraj and Kitab Badi, which is just from first to last pages full of gossip and innuendo, and extremely of a malicious form against Sofa Azal and the other Bayanis, right? Um, the non-corruption angle, talk about Baha'is not being engaging in corrupt behavior. Well, Mirza Hossein Ali Nuri was a land speculator. We know that these people were buying land on the cheap in Palestine, and sometimes then selling it at 10 times the value to these arriving Zionist Jews from Europe. So you put all of this together, as Baha'u'llah, so the other Baha'is. So this is why I know for a fact that the entire ethos of Baha'ism is the same, whether you're talking about its foundation or its various spin-offs. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the hyphens or the Rimiites of various shades, et cetera, et cetera. They're all the same shit as far as I'm concerned. Now, how do these people justify themselves this kind of behavior when they have these principles enunciated? Well, the internal contradiction of Baha'ism has always traveled through this trajectory of contradiction, where they espouse a set of beliefs, but they act in a completely opposite way of what these set of beliefs say. I witnessed this completely in my own extended family growing up. It's, in fact, was the primary reason that turned me off to Baha'ism in the first place, as well as what turned my father off at a very early age to Baha'ism. The double standards are the standard within Baha'ism, in all of them, and especially with the hyphens and especially with the Iranian Baha'is. Now, ex-Bahaism, when we go look at this phenomena of the ex-Bahaism, it's, first of all, this is not a new phenomena. Arguably, these various mutations of ex-Bahaism have their locus in the liberal Baha'i explosion that came out of the Talisman at Indiana.edu fracas of 1996, which I was a participant of. And so the ex-Baha'i itinerary is basically a spin-off from liberal Baha'ism. But what it represents, what ex-Bahaism represents, is actually an attempt by a segment of the Baha'i establishment itself, right, who will exceed certain points, at least quietly, to the liberal Baha'i crowd. But it is an attempt by them to control the hemorrhaging and control the fractures within the greater Baha'i organization. That is why ex-Baha'is and people who identify themselves, in my opinion, as ex-Baha'is exclusively, people like Dale Husband, these moderators of the ex-Baha'i list on Reddit, like Nasser M. Tisani and that Investigator 19 and that fake guy, Salman Wilson, etc. These people are in reality working for the system. And these mechanisms of of fake opposition are ones that governments and intelligence agencies and corporations, etc., big organizations in general, have mastered over a long period of time. I watched the emergence of the ex-Baha'i identity from the ground floor, and this, at least in recent period, this begins exactly at the point of 2002, the middle of 2002, with the arrival of Eric Stetson. This kid who came from an evangelical Christian background, simultaneously to a Unitarian Universalist background. This was at a period where myself and several other people that were associated with me, we really had the back of we had put the Baha'i systems back against the wall with their own scandals, because these people were just churning out scandal after scandal after scandal, and there was leak after leak after leak, and especially here in this continent, in Australia, with the manner in which the Baha'i administration came down on two particular Iranians in Western Australia, Mr. Hamid Tahiri and Ahmad Karimpour, back in 2001, 2002, merely for associating with non-Baha'i Iranians. All of these scandals was increasingly creating a serious problem for the Baha'i administration, the Baha'i powers that be, and especially with the explosion of lists on the internet criticizing them. So with the arrival of Eric Stetson, what they did, and they did it particularly through the liberal Baha'is, these people around Juan Cole, Allison, and Steve Marshall, etc., they began to start to contain the problem, right? They didn't want to see the Baha'i community completely implode, because the train was moving in that direction at that point in 2002, and I was fully pushing that train off the platform, if you would, And this is where it needed to go, because as far as I'm concerned, I've been very crystal clear about this for over 20 years now, almost 30 years now, that, Baha'ism needs to be eradicated as an organization. This is a toxic, abusive cult. and whatever face that they put up to the world about themselves, this is something as bad as fascism that needs to be taken and needs to be eradicated.
Oh yes.
Ex-Baha'i, now instead of forcing people into the mainstream of their own consensus organization, which is the hyphen organization, and also as a method to combat these various other schismatic Baha'i groups like the various Rimiite factions. The powers that be in Haifa realized that they could co-opt the liberal Baha'is, which they did through the Marshalls and Sen McGlynn and all of those people. And then through that facility, once Eric Stetson came on the scene in mid-2002, claiming to be a Baha'i prophet. He called himself Mustaghas al-Baha and put out a book called the Book of Restoration. At that point, the system saw its opportunity and then used Eric Stetson to use as a way to corral the more radical elements of the liberal Baha'is into this camp and then create divisions by excluding people, myself, beginning with myself, and others who were not towing that particular line. And it became very apparent to me almost immediately in 2003 when he put his first ex-Baha'i list together on Yahoo groups that this is a form of this was a form of controlled opposition. This was, what was going on here, and the people that were being included and excluded by these people. This was a narrative coming straight from Haifa. And then the people that you saw over time come on that list and became sort of the co-satraps of this list with Eric Stetson. People who are, politically right-wing, people who weren't even Baha'is, for that matter, but who were solidly pushing a very fundamentalist and very hardline hyphen line in this list, with Mr. Eric Stetson doing absolutely nothing, to curtail these people or to kick them off his list. Then sometime after this, Mr. Eric Stetson went back again through his evangelical Baha'i phase and then evangelical Christian phase, sorry, and then dropped that and came out the other end as claiming to be a Unitarian Universalist. This was a period that I was sort of communicating with from afar, from some of them, with some of the members of the family of Badiullah and Ziaullah, whatnot, in places like Cyprus and also Palestine, etc. He heard about it, and once this film, Baha'is in My Backyard, came out and was screened on Australian national television on SBS in 2007, basically Eric Stetson jumped in front of the line and basically made contact with the people directly in Haifa itself. And then all of a sudden we see that Mr. Stetson is creating the Unitarian Baha'is, trying to revive the family of Muhammad Ali. Now, that in itself, and I said this to several of these people in London in 2011, that in itself was an attempt to co-opt these very same people into being controlled by the hyphens, right? See, the hyphen leadership has realized that online, at least online, maybe nowhere else, online, as long as they control the narrative and control the discourse, right, all these opposition discourses are meaningless, that they can keep doing what they're doing, right? But if they lose control of the story, if they lose control of the narrative, that's when they are in trouble. And that is what ex-Baha'i represents. It is so obvious to anybody who has been a veteran like myself and who has seen what has happened over the last 20, 25, almost 30 years now in cyberspace with these Baha'is, that a list like ex-Baha'is is overtly a list of gatekeepers. From its moderator, from even that Nasser Emtisali, who goes by the name of Mirza John, to those two other individuals, this list is an attempt to gatekeep Baha'i opposition into ex-Baha'is. Then we find out that these individuals are actually connected in Iran to Hamid Farnak, an extremely dubious individual in my book, obviously in some way connected to the reformists of that regime.
And not to forget, Wahid, actually, his magazine, called Baha'i Pajui or Baha'i Research, in my book, is the stronghold and bastion of ex-Baha'is.
Yes.
And in defense of indefensible, he once told me, that, the incompatible playthrough of ideas held by ex-Baha'i is inevitable. Because according to Hamid Farrow, the human brain has a lot of drawers and compartments, and lots of neurons just don't talk to one another. And therefore, he said, you can find plenty of Bernie Sanders supporters, who have a vague value in some future revolution, while also, believe in the importance of investing their money wisely. They can easily switch from discussing the unjust distribution of wealth in the world, to discuss the performance of their Wall Street investment. And he's just justifying, through this loose and stupid analogy. How would you say to that?
Well, first of all, I think his analogy it just doesn't work. This is what you need to understand about Hamid Farnok. Just like Mortaza Ismailpour that we talked about a few weeks ago, there is no question that Hamid Farnok is working for the intelligence ministry of Hassan Rouhani, right? And he is in that faction of reformists. And as has become increasingly evident, these reformists are aligned with the Baha'is, right? That 2016 meeting of Faiz Hashemi with Faribat Kamalawadi basically enshrined the matter and engraved it into stone, that there is an alliance between these various reformist and moderate reformist blocs within the IRI with the Baha'is. Hamid Farnok comes out of that milieu. Now, that particular milieu has a long-term interest in changing the system in Iran, not necessarily even for the good, because, reformists, for example, in most democratic countries lean to the left, lean to socialist economics. The reformists, whether we're talking about the people that came out of Khatami years or the people that came out of the green fracas of 2009, or even the people who have been around Hassan Rouhani since 2013, these people want to bring a completely unadulterated neoliberal economic system to Iran, right? Where you may have like a ornamentation or a manicured version of Shia Islam in Iran, but ultimately the neoliberal economics, which is the most brutal form of capitalism, would completely, dominate Iran. This would be the Pahlavi years on steroids in terms of the problems that Iran experienced. Now, in my opinion, eventually the Islamic Republic of Iran obviously needs to go. The system of the Velayat al-Faqih is completely untenable as a system. But nevertheless, we want to get a future IRI Iran right. We don't want to fall into the same traps that we fell into 1979, right? And so forces such as the Baha'is, such as these Rouhani, Khatami reformists within the IRI, the monarchists and the MEK, these are the forces that represent a possible sabotage of the political development of Iran into a viable democratic socialist system, the kind of system that Mossad, Dr. Fatemi, for example, envisaged. Not, secular, yes, but also one that respects tradition, one that respects Iran's heritage, but simultaneously one that respects Iran's diversity, but on a level playing field. Not on the kind of, not in a kind of situation where you have, like you had under the Shah, where they made nods to certain things, but then you had these Baha'is infiltrating the system all the way to Savak, as they did with Parviz Sabati, who was the effective, the effective ruler of the Shah's secret intelligence until about the eve before the revolution. We want to stop this from happening. So Hamid Farnok and his Baha'i Pajruhi, anybody who has actually read this thing over a period of time, and people who have even submitted articles and cooperated with them, such as my friend Sayyid Miqdad Nawawi Razavi, we have all come to the conclusion there are very fishy things about this, that this is not exactly an anti-Baha'i magazine. And look at when you look at the various editions and who they have actually devoted this magazine to. For example, they have devoted the magazine to Juan Cole, then one to Dennis McEwen, then one to Eric Stetson, then finally one to a complete nobody.
Sorry, right? It seems that they are anti-Baha'i, or...
No, they are not. This is what I'm saying. They are not anti-Baha'i. Baha'i Pashtu'i will pretend is trying to ride the train trying to ride the wave in Iran of all these various publications who are anti-Baha'i.
No, they're trying to give this impression that
Yeah,
they're anti-Baha'i.
they are trying to give this impression, but they are actually doing the very opposite. So in essence, what Baha'i Pashtuhi represents, in my opinion, is a form of counterinsurgency operation. So in the name of, anti-Baha'i or critical Baha'i publication in Iran, which there are so many of them in Iran, it's not just one or two. In the name of that, they are actually trying to create a Baha'i-friendly cadre and crowd within Iran. It was interesting. My friend Syed Mekdad Nazavi submitted one or two articles to this publication and had them published. They later offered him to be the editor-in-chief of the magazine, and he turned them down. And I asked him, I said, why did you turn them down? He says, because there's a lot of unanswered questions about this outfit. And he said he wouldn't be cooperating with them anymore. He had, publications that he wanted to put out there, etc. But I keep going back to the figure of Hamid Farnok himself. Hamid Farnok, in my opinion, is most definitely a character out of the mold of Mortaza Ismailpour. Maybe not as exuberant in the form that Mortaza Ismailpour was, but almost exactly identical to what Mortaza Ismailpour was doing. Hamid Farnok was doing from the publication angle of this. Now, all of these ex-Bahais, and especially even a lot of these liberal Bahais, and even people who have been, thrown out of the Baha'i faith, like Alison Marshall, they're all very chummy with this Hamid Farnok, and I find this very suspicious. Now, devoting an issue to Juan Cole without explaining that Juan Cole has been accused of being an advisor to the Central Intelligence Agency, as he was accused by Counterpunch, one of the biggest left-wing e-signs in North America. The fact that Juan Cole was completely undressed and was revealed to be a liar in the lead up to the NATO attack on Libya by claiming that there was a workers' rebellion in Tripoli, which was proven to be actually a jihadist, Islamist insurgency backed by the CIA and NATO. These, for any other person, would have destroyed their credibility. Yet these people in Iran, in a country that claims an anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist narrative regarding the West, is publishing a so-called academic. Fine, the guys published stuff on the Baha'i faith, but they devoted an entire issue to Juan Cole, speaks volumes. Then the next, or the earlier edition, they had devoted to Dennis McEwen. Now, Dennis McEwen's Bobby scholarship is still one of the best out there in the Western-speaking world. But politically, Mr. Dennis McEwen is a Zionist. And he has been a serving member of a variety of these British Friends of Israel committees of the British Parliament, going back to the early years of
and he's on good terms with IPAC.
He's on great terms with IPAC and all the various, these North American and also European-based Zionist lobby. These are the very same people that just recently destroyed the career of Jeremy Corbyn and got the current Labour Party leader in Britain to throw him out of the Labour Party. All of these false accusations of anti-Semitism against members of the Labour Party of Britain came from these people directly. Accusations that on substance have been proven to be false, just like Donald Trump's accusations of voter fraud.
Yes, that's right.
On it goes. Then they devote an issue to Eric Stetson. What has Eric Stetson done? Eric Stetson ran two lists on the internet, both of them on Yahoo groups, and wrote a foreword to a book whose majority content was actually written by other people, mostly from members, the extended members of the family of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, right? Yet, none of these people gets their time in this publication, but Eric Stetson does. Then, to add even more insult to injury, the following edition that they published on an individual was none other than the guy that I labeled as Gomer. An individual who is a complete nobody.
Speaking of identity, hardly anyone actually has one identity. Nobody is just a Muslim, or just
That's
an
100%
Italian
true.
or just a capitalist. But my point is, every now and then, uh, I believe a fanatical creed comes along, and insists that people should believe in only one story, and have only one identity.
Yeah.
In recent years, in recent generations, the most fanatical, such creed was ex-Bahaism, I
Yeah.
believe. Ex-Bahaism actually insisted that people should not believe any story except, the story they are offering,
Yeah.
and should have no identity, no kind of identity except the identity they are,
Yes,
laying out for
but you know
them.
what? Dale Husband basically cat out of the bag is because then Dale Husband began to very vigorously push this Unitarian Universalist narrative and this whole alternative. I mean, Unitarian Universalism is basically a cult of middle class white Americans who want to have their cake and eat it too. A church without God, as if that makes any sense. But in the bizarro world of America, of white Americans, it's possible. They've
But
done
it
it.
appears to be deeply rooted in evangelical cult.
Yes, because most of the people that are recruited are people who are disenchanted by the various evangelical churches, and they gravitate to something like that because it's liberal, and it caters to a need, a sort of need that certain white congregationists have who don't want to, hang around, the Southern Baptist or Pentecostal congregations, so they gravitate to something like Unitarian Universalism. Now, I know for a fact from a former a Baha'i who's now passed away, this Cal Rollins of blessed memory, a very interesting African American man who had seen quite a lot in his life. He was a Baha'i, but he had left, but he'd also been at one point very highly ranked in the Baha'i administrative system and knew a lot of people. He had known Horace Hawley personally, and he said to me that he had been deputized in the late 1970s as a go-between between the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and this now then emerging Unitarian Universalist church. And all throughout the 90s, he had served in that capacity. And then as he aged, he kind of gave away some of these responsibilities. Cal passed away during the last decade. He's very sorely missed. He was a great guy, great person to talk to. His experiences of certain things were invaluable. I gained a lot of insight into a lot of things, and he was extremely cynical about Baha'ism, especially in the United States, although he had been a card-carrying Baha'i for over 50 plus years as an African American. But he alerted me that there was a very tight relationship between the UU and the NSA of the United States, and that went back to the late 1970s. And that put up all my alarm bells. Because what this then represents, what people like Dale Husband and they're pushing, and also Eric Stetson, represent for people who are genuinely wanting to sever their ties with the Baha'i organization is for the Baha'is, right? So rather than, allow these people to find either a new home or just leave altogether, right? What the ex-Baha'i lists, such as the one on Reddit or the ones that Mr. Eric Stetson had, is an attempt to basically sheepdog these people into a certain place and then control any potential opposition to the system, right? Bernie Sanders got accused of this by many on the left of being a sheepdogger for the Democratic Party in sheepdogging people, whether to the Clinton candidacy or to the Biden candidacy. That my jury remains out on that specific, but that this term became quite popular over the last couple of years over this. But essentially, this is the task of the ex-Baha'is today. Now, my question is that what happened to someone like Nasser Emtisali? This guy, an Indian or Pakistani Baha'i, I've been told on a very reputable tip by somebody who knows these things, that he once went by the name of Imran Sheikh, that Imran Sheikh, who put all these Baha'i awareness blogs up, is actually the identity of Nasser Emtisali. Nevertheless,
Is it his real name?
who knows? Who knows? what has happened to this guy is that he himself has been pushed into the center. So whereas he was quite, his position on a lot of these issues was actually closer to mine, up until to maybe 3-4 years ago, from around I would say 2017 to now, his position shifted to something else. Now he has claimed, and I believe this is false. He has claimed to have been a former Baha'i. There's no evidence of this, that he was a former Baha'i. He is certainly coming from some kind of a Muslim background.
Yes.
Present Muslim himself. More than likely, he is one of the many people on the payroll of the IRI itself in India. And there's a lot of people like that in India.
So let us concede. Yeah. Let us concede that ex-Bahaism is, what happens, I believe, when Bahaism, in itself wants to make life too easy, for itself by denying all other identities and obligations.
Yeah.
For instance, there has been a lot of, confusion lately about the exact meaning of Babism.
Yeah.
Baha'is call almost anyone they don't like a Babi or an Azali. Have you ever noticed, the term is in danger of degenerating, into an all-purpose term of abuse and slander.
But this is deliberate. This is deliberate. By the people all the way behind the scene, right? This is how you make these movements, how you destroy and discredit movements is by pushing these sorts of language among a crowd. Get these people, these parents to repeat it again and again and again, in order to then ultimately come back to the movement that you're targeting in order to destroy it. There are ways around this, and I've spoken to the Bayanis in Iran themselves about this many times, and, we got a handle on the situation. But the fact of the matter is this. The fact is that these ex-Baha'is, and beginning with Eric Stetson himself, are very conspicuously anti-Babi. They hate the Bab. And, they will give pro forma recognition to, Babism and the figure of the primal point as, the genesis of what ultimately became Baha'ism. But they all despise the Bab. Mr. Dale Husband made his hatred very public and very...
That's my question, right? Yeah. That's exactly my question. How does an ex-Baha'i, typical of the ex-Baha'i, evaluate and assess the state of art of, the Babi religion?
How could he? I mean, first of all, Dale Husband is not a particularly well-read individual, even with the available sources in English. I mean, he quotes from very small selection of Baha'i sources.
I never believed he's a literate guy. I never believed.
No, he's not. I mean, he's obviously... I don't think he's even read maybe the Dawnbreakers from beginning to end. Let alone having read Amonat or McEwen or, some of these other scholars, let alone E.G. Brown, So he has no access to this stuff. He's never applied himself to learning the intricacies of this history and understanding all of the pro and con arguments on all sides, learning his sources, getting good grasp of the story. He hasn't done any of that. When he talks about Babism, he's talking in sound bites. But the sound bites that he's talking from are very conspicuous pro-Baha'i organization sound bites. Stephen Bayer has caught him red-handed in these positions. I have, Matt Douglas have, and other people have as well. And this is also what I would claim is one of the many tales of the rooster, proving what I'm saying here, that this entire ex-Baha'i milieu is nothing more than a gatekeeping exercise for the powers that be in Haifa to control.
So there is just one yardstick, They say if a school of thought, if a party, if a religion serve their interest, it is good,
Yeah.
If that does not serve, their interest, it is terrible,
Yeah.
And how does, an ex-Baha'i decide what to teach kids, in schools? What, can you, because we are reaching the end of, this part, can you tell me the real story of Abbas Amonat.
Well, the real story of Abbas Amonat is that Abbas Amonat had fallen afoul of the Baha'i system as a result of writing his dissertation, The Early Years of the Baha'i Movement. Abbas Amonat was married to a very educated Iranian woman who was a member of the Ni'matullahi Sufi order. And together they left the UK after Amonat finished his dissertation and he took up his job in Yale. Soon thereafter, I think they had a falling out and they had a divorce. In my opinion, this wife that he separated from Mr. Amonat was a very tempering force in his life. After she left his life, it's very obvious that he kind of lost his bearings because for the entirety of the decade of the 90s, all we heard about Abbas Amonat from the Baha'i powers that be was that he was not a Baha'i. They were demonizing this man continually to the point that even his family were complaining about it to me in LA. His parents.
And by the way, Wahid, they were. I'm talking about.
Let me finish. Then all of a sudden, I would say from the middle part of the first decade of the 21st century, all of a sudden we see that Abbas Amonat's reputation is being now manicured over. Previously, they were demonizing him. Now they were bent on, basically bringing him back into the fold. So all of a sudden, as I would probably around 2009, just after the elections in Iran, Abbas Amonat suddenly his reputation changed for the better. Then he was invited as one of the keynote speakers to this conference that they held in Ottawa, in Canada, in 2011 about human rights. This is where the Sadri brothers and Irfan Sabeti and Mujan Momin and Amonat and all of these people were there at this particular conference. And then from that point onward, Amonat suddenly starts to become an official spokesperson or semi-ad hoc spokesperson for the Baha'is, whether in the BBC or other Iranian language portals.
Doesn't it come at odds with the conception of its communication?
It is extremely bizarre because Abbas Amonat was being overtly demonized inside the Baha'i community throughout the 1990s. Demonized constantly. I was witness to this, but for some reason, I think that the Baha'i powers realized that demonizing a figure like Abbas Amonat was too risky as a long-term strategy for them, and so they brought him back. Somehow, obviously, they made an offer he couldn't refuse, whatever that means, and they brought him back, and now he is acting in the capacity of some kind of spokesman. I don't believe that they officially sanctioned him. I don't think he lost his voting rights or was declared a covenant breaker. That would have made a lot of noise had they done that. They didn't have that kind of muscle, and especially given who his brother was Hossein Amonat. And the fact that his father, even though he was quite a senior figure at the time, was not someone to be messed with in that kind of way by the Baha'i administration. The Musa Amonat, great man, whose memory is truly blessed and his place is extremely empty, was someone not to be trifled with. If they had gone after his family, especially Abbas Amonat, and tried to do worse than what they had already done, Musa Amonat would have known what to do and would have created unbelievable problems for the Baha'i system in LA. He actually said this to me one time. He said, there's only so far that people like myself can be pushed before we will just, we will explode at these people. But this was the position of the father who was disenchanted with the whole system, who penned this 10-volume history of Jews that have converted to Baha'ism, that they wouldn't ever allow it to be published. And even this book that Mehrdad Amonat and Abbas have published,
Jewish Identity.
Yeah, it takes elements from various volumes of their father's book, 10-volume study, but it's not the entire thing.
You believe he had a kind of falling out with the machinery?
He had a falling out with the machinery, yeah, and he also was witness to a lot of corruption both in Iran as well as in the United States. Not just from individual Baha'is, but from the system itself. So he was a man that for all practical purposes, at least in some of the conversations with me, what he confessed, he had lost faith in Baha'ism, right? Like I mentioned one time before, Mr. Musa Amanat was the guy that gave me the letter of introduction to, the late Ersan Yarshater of Encyclopedia Iranica. It was because these two were lifelong friends. And Yarshater, we all know his story. He was excommunicated by Shoghi Effendi for daring to come to the United States. But Musa Amanat's never, followed that dictum of Shoghi Effendi. And in fact, one thing he told me is that the vast majority of Jewish Baha'is, especially the upper middle class, and particularly after the death of Shoghi Effendi, did not remotely observe this thing that Shoghi Effendi did with Ehsan Yarshater. They all would meet, they all maintained their cordial relationships with Ehsan Yarshater, which is very interesting to me because the Jewish Baha'is, from my experience of growing up with some of these people, are the most fanatical of Baha'is. But yet, when it came to the issue of Ehsan Yarshater, they all ignored Shoghi Effendi and maintained their relations with Ehsan Yarshater. But through Musa Amanat, I got to meet Ehsan Yarshater, had a whole half a day with him in his office there in New York City, near Columbia University. So, the Amonats, I think what may have happened is after the passing of Musa Amonat, the two brothers, especially Abbas and Mehdad, may have started to feel a little bit, how should one put it? They lost their rock. The family rock was Musa. Musa Amanat was the family rock for both Hussein, for Mehdad, for Abbas, their sister, etc. And once he was gone, they felt vulnerable, and for some reason they caved in. They caved into the demands of the system, and the system obviously may have accommodated these people in some fashion. So it made it worth their while to come back and do the kind of prostituting that they're doing at the moment for the Baha'i system. But that is what it is. Let's call it what it is. What Abbas Amanat is doing at the moment, especially in that long introduction that he co-authored with Feridun Bahman, as Tehran to Akka, from Tehran to Akka.
Tell me about that book.
Yeah, that book and that introduction especially is nothing more and nothing less than a form of intellectual prostitution. That is what it is. Now, if Mr. Amanat thinks that this will somehow spruce up his legacy, I guarantee it, that one day, especially after he's retired, and particularly after he's dead, that introduction that he co-authored with Feridun Ahmed will come to haunt him in a very, very serious way. That his lack of intellectual integrity on certain questions of Babi history are spelled out in black and white in that.
Why did devote around 100 pages to tech Sophia Azal?
Because the fact of the matter is, see, and as some of these people like Imam Mutlaq Arani, etc., have confessed to you, is that up until probably the latter part of the decade of the 21st centuries, the Baha'is were convinced that they had won, that there were no longer Azalis, there were no longer Bayanis, right? They sent Mujan Momen on that errand to Cyprus in the early part of, or the late part of the 90s. And he came back just writing lies about the state of the family of Sopa Azal, not realizing that not all of them were still living there. There were many members of Sopa Azal family that are scattered amongst the Iranian diaspora in Canada, in America, in Western Europe, elsewhere, even in Turkey. But he wrote this BS article about these people. These people were convinced we have won. There's not a single Azali anymore. And what is left of these family members of Sopa Azal are, for practical purposes, all atheists that don't want to have anything to do with the religious legacy of their family. They didn't count on the fact that there was already a vibrant Bayani community in Iran. Granted, in Taqiyya, hiding their faith, as they should, because you're living in a system in Iran that is hostile to you. But by the same token, you have the Baha'is who are also hostile to you. So the Bayanis are taking it both from the IRI and the Baha'is simultaneously. But once I first made contact with the Bayanis in 1999, and I then slowly started to convince them to come out of this, at least to put up a website, right? At first, the Baha'is didn't want to believe that this was true. They thought this was all a connivance and a setup by me, and that all of these texts that ended up on Bionic.com were mine. That I had gone all over the world scanning Bionic texts. Some of these texts come from an assortment of places. These were all mine, and that I had put up this site, and this became a talking point that got repeated again and again and again and again and again. That I was the only Bayani in the world. Now I will one day, in a text that I will publish, maybe sooner than later, put an underscore over this fact that when the Baha'is make this kind of accusation and say that I am the only person, nafs Wahid, okay, that is a Bayani, right? They are actually confirming a very important theological point of the Bayan about the identity of the promised one of the Bayan, because this is one of the things that the primal point says about the nature of the promised one of the Bayan, that he's a single soul. And for the Baha'is to then be constantly hammering on this point that there are no Azalis, there are no Bayanis other than Wahid Azal, in fact, have been is basically in a kind of an inverted way, from a spiritual perspective, shoring my credibility up, right? And this is one thing that just blows my mind now, right? Because other Bayanis have come out of the woodwork over the last couple of years from Iran and elsewhere, right? Now these people are beginning to realize, wait a minute, maybe this narrative isn't true. But this narrative not being true is especially dangerous for these people for a very simple reason, is because this story, this talking point about the Azalis and the Bayanis being a dead community, was first initiated by Shoghi Effendi in his God Passes By. He was the one who unequivocally claimed in that rag of his that there were no Azalis anymore in the world. And since, whether with me or with other Bayanis that have come out of the woodwork, and the existence of the Bayani community itself in Iran and elsewhere, this proves Shoghi Effendi a liar. Unequivocally, and that's just on that particular point, not other points.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, lastly, on that note, up until the rise of Baha'i Vajui, or this Baha'i research, headed by this guy, Hamid Farraq, the word ex-Baha'i per se, was framed as rather, a pejorative term, an unglamorous symbol, but I believe this guy was vastly trying to normalize, this term, so that if you look at the mirror, if you are, for instance, supposedly an ex-Baha'i, and if you look at the mirror, you won't see anything ugly, so a normalization, is taking place.
And why that's going, why this is happening, and how this proves Hamid Farraq to be working for the Baha'is? Here's the reason. If the regime in Iran goes tomorrow, right, the Baha'is are going to come and claim a Baha'i population not on the basis of their own numbers of people who are on the rolls, but they're going to try to claim Baha'is based on the number of a census that will obviously be taken in a post-IRI era. Now, if you have people, and as we know, in Iran, there is a lot of problems. I mean, all the problems that we see here in the West amongst, adherents and the Baha'i organization is one thing, but in Iran, these are magnified, right? By a factor of 100 sometimes. Now, what the USJ is thinking is that, here's the thing, we give some legitimacy to the term ex-Baha'i, right? Allow certain Iranians in Iran itself to even make that claim without being on the rolls as Baha'is, right? When we come to power in Iran, or when the regime in Iran falls, we will then turn around and claim all these various people as Baha'is for a census in order to what? To create a political constituency. So then that a future system in Iran will be forced to grant a seat to the Baha'is in a future Iranian parliament, the same way, say, the Jews, the Christians, the Zoroastrians have. You see what's going on here? This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to create and fabricate overall legitimacy, even with people who by their own speech, do not adhere to the pronouncements of the UHJ and are not loyal to the UHJ. But they are trying to create a situation where then they have control over this label itself and then claim it as a means to claim then, a political constituency in a future Iran.
And they are also, trying to get people to forget all other alternative stories,
Which is also another trick that the Baha'i administration tries in one setting, in one way, and when they have failed in other ways, then they implement it another way. Like I said, this is a counter-insurgency, counter-espionage strategies that I've read about these things in various books, but what the UHJ or these people that they've hired, to handle this situation over the last 10, 20 years, what they have implemented with this whole mushrooming culture of various Baha'i groups and subgroups is precisely for that very thing. It's to hold a line, right? And also not to allow these people to then perhaps pack the ranks of the various Orthodox Baha'i groups, because these Orthodox Baha'i groups, although I'm not very friendly to any of them either, but these Orthodox Baha'i groups themselves are enemies to Haifa, right? So, rather than, the Orthodox Baha'is getting these people into their own ranks, right? What the UHJ has created with this system of ex-Bahais and liberal Baha'is is that so people fall from roles, cut their links, at least on paper, with Haifa, but then fall into the trap, into a Trojan horse, which is ultimately controlled by Haifa itself in the form of Baha'i liberals or ex-Baha'is. Yeah.
Wahid, when I look at the ex-Baha'is in greater depth, I intend to use that old metaphor. I believe ex-Baha'is, it's a bundle of rods.
Yeah.
Every single rod, is weak and powerless.
Yes.
Yet, taken together, they will be able to hammer and slay everything,
Yeah.
And in that, I believe we should also involve people like Yasser Mirdamadi or Hossein Kamadi. I believe these two guys are in the closet Baha'is.
Kamadi's association with Novin Dustar and One World Publications in the UK. I mean, there's nobody who can tell me that these people are not, are in the Baha'i camp.
They're complicit,
Well, of course they're complicit. I believe that Hossein Kamali is a crypto Baha'i, outright. And so is Yasser Mirdamadi, as well as, let's note this, Leila Chamanka.
Leila Chamanka
is another individual, very dubious. Now, one of the reasons why these people have done what they're doing obviously has to do with career promotion prospects. They want their careers promoted. And Leila Chamanka realized that, hanging out in Exeter with Sajjad Rezvi was not going to give her that promotion. But once she went to the United States, when she got that job at Ohio State University, which incidentally is the same place that Shole Quinn, the wife of Stephen Lambden, both Baha'is, was at one point. Leila Chamanka has now gone to the opposite extreme of what she was when I first met her in 2011, 2012, virtually online, and is now beating her chest as much as possible for Baha'i narratives. Now, Hassan Ershad told you and a couple of rest of us that Leila Chamanka came very close to actually converting to Baha'ism, right?
Yes. She was on the verge.
My conversations with Leila Chamanka have led me to believe that, while at the moment she's not a believer, she's an opportunist. She's trying to promote her career. And these people at this time, given where she's living in the United States, are her meal ticket. right? Because we have those two books, those two publications. One of them, which was published as her PhD dissertation, her first PhD dissertation in Iran, where it's actually a very good study, where she documents, the relation of the Baha'is with the Pahlavi system over a 30, 40-year period. She had actually even gotten access to some of the Sabak files. So, for her to write a book like that, knowing the reality, and not just one book, she wrote another book where just right after she published that as her dissertation, where she discusses the various fractures and divisions within the Iranian Baha'i community during the Pahlavi years. So she brings up, for example, the whole, the friction that was created after the death of Shoghi Effendi, the first initial Rimiite Baha'is in the Iranian Baha'i community of Iran itself. She touches on the episode of Jamshid Ma'ani and how that created. All of these things were laid out in
But let's not forget, right? In that case, she remarked, that she had a lot of regrets, for writing that book.
This is crocodile tears. Ashke temsah, as we say in Persian. No, she has regrets is because where she's at right now in the United States, the Baha'is can create a lot of trouble for her in the USA within the academic setting. Had she continued to live in Europe, whether in Germany or the UK even, and gotten a job there, they couldn't touch her. That's her opinion. Her publication is also sourced. This is not, this is not pseudo-academic stuff that she was doing in Iran. This is very well-written, well-sourced, well-documented studies about these extremely controversial elements of Baha'ism. But, she knows, which way the wind blows in a country like the United States. This is why I absolutely refuse to set foot in that shithole of a country, the USA. It's precisely because of that very reason. Because there are so many special interests, and especially in interests like the Baha'is, inside disciplines like Islamic studies, Mideast studies, steering where people go, where people will get jobs or won't get jobs, who is in and who is out. Whereas in Europe, it's not like this. Their reach doesn't go that far. Now, they've attempted to get their reach as far as possible in the manner in which they have stacked their own people in a publishing company like E.J. Brill in the Netherlands, and the kind of people that are working with them through E.J. Brill, etc. But, by and large, the reach of the Baha'is in Europe is still not that far as they have it in the United States.
As noted earlier, right, some of these ex-Baha'is, started, a campaign of rampage, to wreak havoc with their activities. For instance, last year, as you can obviously remember, this Leila Chamankhah, tried to wreck our work, as we were working on, an entry for an encyclopedia.
And just let's, before anybody forgets, this behavior by Leila Chamankhah, and then soon after that, Dale Husband, began just after Roya passed away in March. Only a few months after this all got into gear with these people.
Oh, yes, that's true. And do you think it fits in very well, with their tendency, to kick off any other alternatives?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
And what has become of Dale Husband? Tell me about him.
Dale Husband is what I would call a small fish in a small pond. He thinks he's king of that pond, which is that ex-Baha'i list on Reddit. They've also given him one of these other lists of theirs to moderate. So, that is the only thing that is shoring up his extremely fragile ego. I mean, he confessed to you that he nearly committed suicide, right?
Yes.
And that's only for the fact that we publicized, the fact that this guy had some pedo-erotic tendencies that were dangerous, and this guy was promoting them on his own.
Yes. I noticed highly neuroticism, in his behavior.
It's not just neuroticism. This is pedo-eroticism. I mean, this guy was basically confessing in several blogs that he's a pedophile. I mean, we put this in front of, you put this in front of a cop, you put this in front of a psychologist, you put this in front of any specialist, and they will read it and they say that this is a window into this guy's own mentality and behavior. And this is after he had threatened me on YouTube that he would destroy me. You understand? Okay.
Whoa.
Right? On Nasser M. Tasali's page. And it's like, okay, bring it on. Let's see what you got. At the end of it, when all of this stuff was publicized, which was thanks to Stephen Bayer, who found them on his blog, for merely publicizing his own writing, not any accusations, but publicizing his own writing, he then confessed to you that he had tried to commit suicide. So this tells you also, the mental stability and rationality of some of these actors. I mean, Stetson is another one of these guys. He claims to be a prophet, right? Getting divine inspiration and revelation. Then he says that Satan, then, he has a satanic experience, and he, disavows his claim, finds his way into an evangelical church, then leaves that evangelical church and finds his way into Unitarian Universalism. These people are insane.
Oh yes, as you are fully aware of that fact that Leila Chamakha opened up to Hassan Ershad,
Yes.
saying that actually her career in the United States is on the fringe, and she was complaining that getting connection with particularly you and I both, is jeopardizing her career and position. But in all likelihood, you also studied law, okay?
Yeah.
In all likelihood, is it possible that Dean of University, expel her on these grounds?
Look, a dean of a university will not turn to a employee who's on a tenure track in the United States, as Leila Chamakha has claimed, claiming that you have to disassociate yourself from X person and Y person. Then, on top of that, claiming to her, the reason we want you to disassociate from these people is that because I believe, the dean of the university, that these people are working for the Iranian government, accusing you and me of, without any evidence, right? No.
For the record, you and I are not on the FBI wanted list.
I mean, I'm almost certain that I'm on a no-fly list with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. I've had that confirmed, and I have no intention of setting foot in the United States ever again anyway, so it doesn't matter to me. But
so you believe, is she out of her righteous mind?
Yeah, I think she's out of her mind and just creating an excuse to disassociate herself, because look at it. It got bad for Leila Chamakha because she had no readership. You understand, right? Now, I helped Leila Chamakha a lot. During the period that she was at Exeter with Sajjad Rezvi, I helped her a lot. I also became the shoulder on which she was crying on a regular basis. She was coming to me, complaining and making up all kinds of stories about Sajjad Rezvi, her advisor, claiming how he was abusing her and doing this, that, and the other thing to her. I have all these emails. The minute she took her distance from us, she got that contract for her book with Routledge, and they published that really silly book of hers, which is based on her dissertation. And as soon as the book came out in hard copy, she didn't want anything more to do with us, because then at that point she believed that she was no longer vulnerable anymore. But look, when you play that kind of dirty politics as the kind that Leila Chamakha plays, you're always vulnerable. It doesn't matter whether it's today or tomorrow, you are always vulnerable, right? So then making up these stories about you and me and her dean at some university, I mean, this is all indicative also that Mrs. Chamakha might actually need a few therapy sessions with a very good seasoned counselor, and maybe a few things to take on top of it as well, prescription.
That's right. Okay, thank you very much, Wahid. That's the end of part one. Hopefully we'll continue in the same way, in the next podcast. Thank you very much. Inshallah. Bye-bye.